Hey IBM folks, it's Beal. I wanted to show you some recent prototyping work I've done and the depth of thinking that goes into that prototyping work. And I also wanted to show it to you in the context of something you may be familiar with. What I'm showing here is your WebSphere Commerce product, and it's Aurora Store, the sample store that you provide to customers with preset data and preset defaults. So I wanted to drill into something particular, and that's the SKU grid widget that is being shown here. Think of the SKU grid widget as a way for users to discriminate for a given product among lots of different SKUs for that product. And the way they do that is through what are called defining attributes. So finish and length, material and thread size are all ways that users discriminate among multiple SKUs. The SKU grid widget, as you provide it, is a responsive widget. It uses JavaScript to essentially define two classes of columns, one in which I believe it's called anchored. The quantity, online availability, and in-store availability are anchored such that when this window gets smaller, they stick around. And certain columns like the defining attribute columns are unanchored and they turn into rows. And here's an example of those overflow defining attributes turning into rows. So that's the widget in a nutshell. And we had a ton of requirements for SKU grid modifications from our business. And certainly the designer wanted to extend our visual design system into it. The context for some of those modifications were that we had our own existing SKU grid widget that predated the introduction of your own. And effectively, we needed to get feature parity with what we had previously, plus we needed to be able to extend it with new functionality and new modifications to your base grid. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what we came up with. And this is a screenshot of our prototyping work. And straight away what you find is that we've been able to take our visual design system and extend it to the SKU grid. And some things you're seeing here, for example, is quite a bit of styling of the filter menus, and you've got an icon there that's been introduced, and there's lots of visual richness on the various states of that menu as well. Next, you'll see that the compare functionality is quite different from the out-of-the-box compare functionality. First of all, the column is moved from the far right to being directly adjacent to the defining attributes, and then we just styled the checkboxes to make it our own. And finally, we weren't real happy with sort of the verbose language of the compare text that supplements the checkbox. I'll come back to that real quick and just show you that when you click compare, it gets a little noisy and the states change quite a bit. We wanted to quiet that down, so we were able to do all those things. Finally, the other thing is that we don't have multiple availability columns for our B2C users. There's only one sense of availability there. So I'm going to move over to our production environment and show you the production implementation of this. And I want to say that much of the CSS that was written for the prototype was used as is in the production version. And what you're seeing here in that production version is we were able to faithfully take all of our prototype styles and turn them into production styles. There are a couple of regressions here. The quantity field is wrapping. I apologize for that. Our engineering team owns that bug, but what I wanted to show you, for example, is we were able to keep this responsive. We were actually going 12 responsive columns instead of the 8 or 9 that were in the out-of-the-box product there, and move the compare column into adjacent to the defining attributes. And watch as I click compare, you'll notice that we just quieted down that quite a bit. Single checkbox doesn't need additional language, and 2 checkboxes now allows you to compare. So we just came up with what we thought was a better design for that. And what I want to talk about with that is how we did it, and it was strategic about how we did it. You'll notice down here that there's still the word added and still the word add more to compare. But what we've done is we've just simply used CSS display none down here to hide those because they weren't needed. So effectively, we were able to get the compare experience we wanted without asking the developers to change the structure of the HTML that was being created. And we're quite happy with that. And of course, just from a styling standpoint, we didn't ask for any changes to the structure in order to do our checkbox styling. So that's what we have in production. Having nailed our B2C experience and got it into production, we then turned our attention to our B2B user. Our B2B users' experience differed significantly from our B2C users in the sense that there was an additional price column for B2B users. It's effectively their negotiated price. Additionally, there was no need to show availability to these users at a glance, and that column goes away. What we wanted to do is see if it was straightforward to style the columns in a way that created a little bit of visual grouping for these three columns. What we find is unstyled, these columns tend to be a wall of text and hard to discriminate among the things that are most important. And so this background shading did that. And what we were able to do is very quickly ascertain that you could do this with a single CSS rule, and here I am toggling that on and off, and just proving that that's a straightforward thing to do. And certainly we needed visual emphasis on quantity. If we don't get a quantity, we're not doing business with the customer. So we were happy with the way that turned out. Next, we had a lot of requests from the business to at least consider the inclusion of images at a glance in the SKU grid. And some of these requests in the past had gone directly to engineering, and our engineering team wasn't built to sort of prototype and consider all kinds of variations on the ways we might do this. And so we interceded and were able to show the business, sort of the drawbacks and the cost of doing this. So here is us showing that you can dedicate a column to it, but you might lose a defining attribute that you want to show as well. And then finally, that you have to get to fairly large size before these images really communicate well. They just don't communicate well at small size, and therefore, as a consequence, you have a ton of scrolling to deal with. And so here we're just showing that you could put this under manufacturer part number and save some horizontal space, but again, in order for these to communicate, you've got to make them large, and you have a lot of scrolling as a consequence, and you're showing fewer at a glance. So next up, we wanted to drive this home. Our product imagery isn't perfect, and it's quite variable. So imagine a product that's has a bunch of components in it, and this is quite common in our business, where we've got this collage of images that represent the product, and they just do not communicate. They almost look like line art at this size, and again, it takes you very large size before you get those to communicate well. What we instead wanted the business to concentrate on is something that was better for the users, and that was using out-of-the-box swatch functionality, in which you can just feed your management center product a set of swatch images that represent values for a defining attribute, and it will just give you a widget that allows you to select those visually. The one thing we hadn't seen any examples of were the ability to put those swatches in the corresponding column in the SKU grid, but checking with the engineers, we thought that was a straightforward extension of the base product, and so instead of doing the images at a glance, we said do the swatches at a glance, and the business followed our direction there, and we were really happy. So we saved the engineering time, saved the engineers a bunch of time prototyping stuff that probably wouldn't have made it into product, as well as steering the business towards something that from a manageability standpoint and a implementation standpoint was a lot simpler. In conclusion, through deep prototyping, we've been able to maximize the happiness of the customer. We've also maximized the happiness of the visual designer, who didn't have to compromise on her visual design, the business, who got to explore some ideas and understand why certain of those didn't make sense, and then the engineering team had to do less experimentation, had to write fewer CSS rules, and generally were able to concentrate on the thing that they do well, which is produce production code. And just in terms of the pace at which we do these things, this probably represents something I would do once a month for various parts of the UI. So in a given year, we would do about 12 different prototypes of this level. So Anyway, I look forward to talking to you more about what I do and the importance of prototyping in terms of producing great products and keeping design teams happy. Thanks so much.